In 1362, after a 38-year reign, Orhan, the first sultan of the Ottoman people, died. His son, Murad I, continued the aggressive expansion of the empire, following the same policy of tolerance as his predecessors: conquer and tax, rather than conquer and convert.
The Ottomans acted in a tolerant way, but not out of any philosophical commitment to something that we would call tolerance today, but for reasons of state. It was easier to subdue territories rather than to try and convert everybody.
The Ottomans' policy of religious tolerance made administering conquered territories much easier. It reduced resistance and diminished the chance of revolt. In many areas, Christian subjects welcomed the Ottomans more as liberators than as oppressors, paying less tax to the Ottomans than they had to previous rulers.
This had a kind of steamroller effect, which helps account for the speed with which the Ottoman conquests occurred, particularly in the Balkans. They simply rolled through whole areas because, yes, they fought. Whenever somebody stood out against them, they fought, and they won. But I think for every place they conquered by force of arms, they probably conquered 2 places by just a very effective PR system.
But for Murad, new Christian subjects offered a greater opportunity. He devised a plan to create a fierce and loyal cadre of troops. Ottoman officials descended on towns and Christian territories, ordering young boys of the village to come forth for inspection.
The villagers would display their youth, and the janissary officer would go from one to the other. Height, weight, proportions. The officer would select the ones he thought would be best and took them with him.
Those selected became conscripts in Europe's first standing army, an army that would transform the continent's military landscape. They were known as new troops, or janissaries. At first, panic spread throughout Balkan Christian communities when the janissary recruiting officers arrived.
It was a process which entailed these children being dragged, literally dragged and forced out of their families.
Families begged local priests to delete their sons' names from parish registers. Some parents arranged marriages for sons as young as 12 to take advantage of the marriage exemption. But over time, attitudes changed.
Families realized how prestigious the path was. They knew what a promising career this could entail, and indeed not few of the more successful recruitees into this system later became very important high-ranking officials in the Ottoman state who did not forget where they came from.
New recruits were brought to the Ottoman capital and converted to Islam. They underwent intense physical training and were drilled in the arts of war.
The training of the janissaries was very thorough and, to a certain extent, ruthless. There was a physical training, weightlifting and wrestling. They practiced the various formations. There was archery practice regularly twice a week.
When their military training was complete, they were tattooed with a number and a symbol and sent out to work. The strongest and brightest were sent to special schools to finish their education.
Everyone was taught a skill.
Some were trained to play in Mater bands that led janissary troops into battle. The sound of their drums and pipes struck terror in the hearts of their enemies.
It was especially important before and during battles and major sieges.
Janissaries who demonstrated extraordinary bravery were rewarded in later life with transfers from military service to civil service. A select few became part of the Sultan's inner palace circle, the counselors and viziers who quietly ran the government. Others were returned to their homelands as administrators. In effect, they became deputies of the Sultan's royal family.
So if you had been taken, let's say, at the age of 12, had been considered one of the top-notch kids, had been sent to the palace school, by the time you're 20, 21, and you pass out of that, you become an officer in the corps, you can become an officer in the provincial cavalry, or an officer in some of the regiments of the palace, and eventually you rise up, and you could even become the Grand Vizier.
Whether as soldiers, advisors, or administrators of far-off lands, the Janissary's sole loyalty was to the Sultan. Murad's revolutionary concept gave him firm control over all his inherited and conquered lands, and turned the Ottoman state into a true empire, reaching deep into Europe. In 1389, Murad was 70 years old and still leading his troops into battle when he was mortally wounded in Kosovo. According to legend, as Murad lay dying, he named Bayezid, his younger rather than older son, to succeed him. Brooking no rival, Bayezid immediately ordered the murder of his older brother Yaqub. Murad's radical departure from eldest succession would set a deadly tradition and define the Ottoman dynasty for centuries.
This whole question of being an Ottoman prince, you were going to have to kill all of your brothers, or they were going to have to kill you.
Over the next decade, the Ottoman Empire descended into chaos and civil war until a new sultan emerged as one of history's great conquerors. Through the early years of the 15th century, the fortunes of the Ottoman Empire rose and fell dramatically.